Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we have for you something a little bit different. This is a video of the process of me making some pro wrestling slash shoot wrestling style martial arts knee pads. So I'm using this watermelon fabric here. This is a cotton spandex, and then you'll see later on the external pattern that I use on the sort of fashion layer is a four-way stretch. I believe it's spandex as well, but it's got a oil slick sort of hexagonal beehive pattern on the top, which I thought looked pretty cool. So what I'm doing here is I'm folding over the fabric and then I'm cutting it out here with a rotary cutter. It is a piece of shite rotary cutter that I got from a dollar store because I'm doing this whole thing, whole reason behind me learning this is to do it on the cheap, because it would actually cost me less money to get fabrics, some tools, and a sewing machine than it was going to cost me to get a set of knee pads from highspots. So fuck them. I've of course now spent more than that money because I've made quite a few sets. So here's the fashion layer. I'm cutting these out again. I'm cutting these to the same size that I cut the foam knee pads, which I'd cut earlier using high density EVA foam. That's the same stuff they use in floor matting, so like martial arts matting. So that should be fairly easy to find. And that pattern there, that is simply a square the size of it's folded over currently, but fully stretched out is a square the size of an A4 piece of paper. So if you fold an A4 piece of paper over to form a square rather than a rectangle, that is the size that you will get there. And so those are all my pieces for the initial knee pads. That will cover the bit of foam. And then I'm cutting in a small semicircle here. This will allow the exterior layer to conform to the size and shape of the foam knee pad within. Of course, we're going to get a bit blurry. This is all filmed on my phone because my camera finally gave up the ghost. It's been serving me for many years and has finally died in the ass. So unfortunately I had to get a little tripod mount for my phone and use that instead. So there we are, we've got the semicircles cut. Those are all roughly the same size. Doesn't really matter if those perfectly line up because as you sew, you'll pin things together and then everything will all hopefully fit. So I'm doing some more cutting of the lining here. So we're going to come back with the watermelon fabric in just a second. And so I'm going to be cutting the straps for the knee pad and the cuff. And I noticed that we had a little bit hanging off the edge here. So just checked how long it was. And I'd already made, this is the second pair that I'd made for myself, so I already knew my own measurements. What I'm cutting this at is, this will be from the edge and then round the back of the top of your knee is the longer of the two strips. And then from the edge and then over the bottom of the knee will be the shorter of the two strips. And I'm cutting it a bit more than an inch folded over. That's to allow an inch wide piece of elastic to pass through the middle later on. I'm sorry if there's any background noise. We've got a thunderstorm and some air conditioning going. I'll do my best to remove it afterwards, but if the sound is like garbage, that's just how it is, unfortunately. So as you can see, I'm cutting these to the same length, those two there, and then these will be to a shorter length, which will fit on the underside of my knee. Alright, and then finally we're cutting the cuff. This is 4 inches folded over. This was actually a bit big in retrospect. I prefer a shorter cuff, but this is just how I cut these to start with. So this is the traditional tray style sort of volleyball knee pad, which you can't apparently get anymore because Adams USA went out of business. You can get them from Amazon and stuff like that, but can't get them for particularly cheap anymore, which is again part of why I did this little project. So checking that everything's all the right length and right width with a little set square there. That set square is also a hunk of shit that I got from the dollar store. The metal deforms out right at the end of the ruler, which makes it a bit interesting to cut sometimes. Alright, got rid of everything, and I think we're pinning together now. Yes, okay, so got the fashion layer there and then the spandex lining. So we're putting those sort of outside faces in, pinning it together. This way we'll sew it together and then flip it inside out, and that will make sure that the seam is mostly hidden. You can still tell where there is a join. The stitches will show through a little bit, but you know, that's just the unfortunate nature of things. From a distance, from like a ning ring distance, it doesn't really matter. And unless you're sort of holding them up to your eyes and scrutinizing them completely and going, oh no, look, you can see a seam line here, because you're some sort of, I don't know, fashionista, you should be fine. Now, I am only using a home sewing machine for these ones rather than an industrial one, and I don't have an overlocker, so I'm just using a zigzag stitch rather than a overlocked stitch, which is like the t-shirt seam stitch, which you should probably know if you're wearing a t-shirt. You can have a look. It doesn't quite look like that, it just looks like a zigzag. This will allow the material that seam sort of stretches into forms, and here you can see I've got all my bits cut and pinned so I can run them through the sewing machine. Using the zigzag stitch allows all those stitches to stretch a little bit while staying held together, whereas if I used a straight stitch, at the moment there's any stretch, it'll just start, the materials will pull apart and then the stitch will start. So here's my home sewing machine. Alright, we're turned on and we're ready to go, and you can see I am very careful because I am fairly new at this. No formal training in terms of using a sewing machine. I think I haven't used one since I was 13 or 14. When we did it at school, tried to make a pair of shorts, and I failed that miserably. So since then I've sort of honed my skills a little bit. The pins will hold the seams in place while you run it through the machine, and then after the seam has gone through under the machine, you can remove the pins before the needle hits them, because if you end up hitting the head of the pin, you'll end up breaking a needle and nearly putting an eye out, which I may or may not have done. Not necessarily on this set, but definitely on another set of Kneepads that I had made. And sewing machine needles are annoying because eventually you will run out, and then you'll have to take some time off from doing what you're doing to go and get some more. Especially if you're out in the sticks, that'll be a bit shit, but conveniently I'm in the city near a hobby store, so I'll be able to... I'm able to resupply. So I've trimmed the strings back so that they're not going to randomly be dangling loose. Even though if everything was pinned inside out, you shouldn't be able to see the strings even if I let them hang in there. It just makes everything look a bit cleaner. And look at those lovely, completely non-straight seam lines. Conveniently, when everything's folded over and stretched out, it all looks straight. So I'm flipping these inside out, and I've cut some inch-thin elastic to feed through the middle there. So these will be the straps on the back of the knee pad. And flipping them inside out makes them look a lot neater. I also... I'll pin these on the inside of the... you'll see in just a minute. So feeding the elastic through here can be a bit annoying. It requires sort of pinching and feeding and pinching and feeding and pinching and feeding. Eventually you'll be able to get everything through, and you just want to cut your elastic to slightly shorter than the length of your straps to make sure that everything is hidden, and then make sure that there is more stretch in the elastic than there is in the straps. Even though I am using spandex, the elastic will stretch more and hold tighter than the spandex will. The way I'm pinning these here is I'm making sure that the elastic and the sort of raw edge of the strap are all going to be hidden when I stitch everything together. So that's why I'm sort of feeding it all the way through and then pinning it together there. That way everything will look a lot neater when it's finished up. The first set of Kneepads I made, you can see little bits of the elastic hanging out, and I haven't quite gone all the way to the edges, and so it doesn't quite look nice. They're completely functional, but in terms of looks, they don't really have it, whereas these ones I was really focusing on trying to get to like in-ring quality stuff rather than just practice stuff. So I'm running back and forth over the top of the elastic attachment 3 times because it requires a decent bit of strength to hold on, because this will be the main stress point of the whole knee pad. So I'm doing that, cutting the strings back and then getting through, and I'm making sure that everything's fed through together, checking there, that making sure that everything was all attached the way it was supposed to, otherwise I'd have to rip the seam and start again. I'm not quite sure what I've done there, but I've screwed something up, and so I was feeding everything back through again. Running back and forth over 3 times, doing that for all 4 of the attachment points. As you can see, my workspace is not particularly large, which makes cutting everything a bit annoying. If you can find a decent sized table, that's better than running on like a little desk, which I have here. But you make do with what you have. So we are running those through, back and forth over 3 times, make sure everything's attached. And we've got 1 more to go. Now the reason I've told you I've used the stretch materials over the top and stretch spandex is to make sure that everything sort of is pulled tight, looks nice and neat. It also means that there is a bit of give and play in terms of your cutting. If you cut things a bit too small, they'll stretch. If you cut them a bit too big, you can, of course, cut afterwards. I am not a very neat person when it comes to all of this stuff. None of my edges are completely square, but everything all works out and looks good in the end. So there you are. There's the knee pad minus the pad. Just showing that it's all worked once you flip it back inside out. So here's my bit of EVA, high density EVA foam. As you can see, it's textured on one side. So I'm putting the textured side on the inside on the knee and the non-textured side on the outside for the appearance. It does take a bit of work getting it in there. You really got to shove and bend and squeeze and really try and get everything all wrapped around. I'm trying to pull the seam onto the rear side of the foam pad. That way the external layer, that sort of honeycomb pattern, is the one that is on the outside shown mostly, whereas if it was not on the inside of the pad, it'll be on the interior instead. So here we are doing the second pad, really pulling that in. So as long as you get the seam all the way on the inside of the foam pad, sort of hooked under the other corner, you won't have any of your lining layer showing. So if the lining layer is not a color that works with the rest of your gear, that's the way it will work out. Whereas I picked complementary colors, the sort of pink and blue work fairly well together. Or at least I believe they're not a complete eyesore. So now I'm pulling that edge all the way over the top, and I'm going to pin those together and then run it through the sewing machine to make sure everything is all attached. So I've pinned those together and I'm changing to a straight stitch. I'm also realizing that I'm going to use a zipper foot here. So a zipper foot has only, rather than sort of having the 2 feet and you guiding it through the eye, the zipper foot is one single line of metal, and I'm trying to find one on my desk at the moment because there is a bunch of garbage there. And there we are. So I change it over from the 2-pronged foot to the single-pronged zipper foot. That means I can have the foam of the knee pad guiding it on one side and the zipper foot guiding the other side, holding the seams together. And so here we are, and you can tell my head comes a lot closer because I'm taking a lot more care with this edge. It is a bit more difficult getting everything lined up and running correctly. So we're just running it through now, taking the pins out as I go. And then you can tell I didn't go back and forth on that edge, which was a bit dumb, which may or may not come back to haunt me later, but I don't think it will, because this is only sort of a stopgap measure, just hold everything together for when you eventually put together and sew together the cuff. So I've got the longer, thicker piece of material from earlier, which is going to be the cuff. This is the one that was 4 inches by about 13 or 14, which is the sort of circumference around the outside of my upper calf, which is where the cuff will attach. And so I'm pinning that together, I think, before moving and running it through the machine. Yeah, getting everything out of the way. I start her off, go back and forth, and then start going. Running it all the way through. As you can tell, the edges are pinned, because stretchy stuff is not the greatest to run through a sewing machine. It sort of deforms itself as it goes through, and it can fold itself over and get in very annoying places. So you've got to pull it tight while it runs through. And the pins can really help. So yeah, that's that one done. Then I flip that inside out like a sock. And then I'll be sewing the seam on that one. So this is the one and only seam that'll sort of be really visible. What's happened here? Oh, I've lost the thread first time, which is a pretty good run for this one. So obviously I've got the tension wrong. I hadn't pulled enough through and lost the thread. So I had to thread the needle again, start again, and then do the seam. So we are running through, making sure that this is a strong seam, making sure I'm going back and forth to close off the thread, because this is one of the other main stress points on the whole knee pad. So that's all cut together and trimmed off. Then I pin it to the bottom of the knee pad. I've sort of folded it up and pinned the bottom edge, which is the edge with the seam, onto the that straight seam of the knee pad. I should have pinned it a little bit higher on sort of a raw bit of the fabric rather than on the seam, because this way when I finished off the knee pads, the seam actually showed through, and that's, you know, not standing up to complete and utter sort of what do you call it, anal retentive scrutiny, but otherwise it all worked. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. That's how to make some pro wrestling knee pads. These are going to be basically my practice pair because I don't really give a shit about them. It cost the same amount to get this particular fabric as it did to get just some plain fabric. Made another pair, my first sold set for one of my training partners. And if you would like a set of custom knee pads to go with your martial arts collection, or a Gentleman's Combatives t-shirt, please send an email to the one on screen. Otherwise, I hope this has been informative and that you guys can go on and create your own gear. Thank you very much for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. I shall see you all next time.